You are nothing but a bottom-feeding warehouse clerk. You think you can defy my orders? Pack your trash and get out of my facility immediately. Marcus, the regional logistics director, slammed the termination papers onto the freezing concrete floor. Grace stood there, her hands trembling, but her eyes on the pallets of baby formula behind him. She knew exactly what was inside those boxes. Fake toxic powder destined for low-income neighborhoods. In the dark corner of the warehouse, a ragged janitor holding his little girl's hand and stopped sweeping. He watched Grace intently, his grip tightening on the broom handle. Hello, everyone. Truth and courage will always tear down the highest walls of deception. If you believe in doing what is right, leave your declaration below. Right. I choose to stand on the side of truth and justice. In the comments, subscribe to our channel to spread this light. Let's rewind to 24 hours earlier. Grace was just trying to survive. She was 28, drowning in student debt and sending half her paycheck back home to keep her mother's house from foreclosure. This warehouse job was her lifeline. She couldn't afford to lose it, but she also took pride in her work. As the quality control clerk, her signature was the last barrier before goods hit the retail shelves. Yesterday morning, a man named Edward walked into the facility seeking day labor. He wore scuffed boots, faded jeans, and a torn flannel shirt. Clinging to his leg was a little girl, no older than 6, looking terrified of the loud forklifts. Marcus, the director, took one look at him and sneered. He told Edward the only job available was scrubbing the biohazard bins out back. He offered minimum wage off the books, knowing the desperate man wouldn't dare refuse. Edward didn't argue. He simply nodded, took his daughter's hand, and walked toward the bins. Grace watched this with a heavy heart. During her lunch break, she found them sitting on a milk crate near the loading dock. Edward was trying to split a stale granola bar with his daughter. Grace didn't say a word. She just walked over and handed the little girl her own container of warm chicken stew. The girl looked up at her father. Edward met Grace's eyes, offering a quiet, sincere nod of gratitude. Later, Grace noticed something unusual. Whenever Marcus was yelling at the staff or cutting corners on safety protocols, Edward would discreetly pull out a small worn leather notebook. He would jot down a few quick lines, then go back to scrubbing. She thought it was strange for a day laborer to take notes, but she was too exhausted to ask. That brings us to the night shift. The warehouse was running on a skeleton crew. 4 massive 18-wheelers rolled into the receiving bay, completely off schedule. Marcus was there, pacing nervously, demanding that the pallets be offloaded immediately. Grace grabbed her scanner and approached the first pallet. It was labeled as premium baby formula and essential pediatric medicine, but the moment she scanned the primary barcode, the system flashed a yellow warning. The lot numbers didn't match the corporate registry. She cut open a box and pulled out a container. The packaging felt cheap. The safety seal was loose, and the expiration dates were printed in the wrong font. Grace had been doing this long enough to know what a counterfeit looked like. She turned to Marcus, holding the container. She told him they couldn't process this shipment. Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her into his glass-walled office. He closed the blinds and pulled a thick envelope of cash from his drawer. He tossed it onto the desk. There was easily $10,000 in there. He told her to stop playing detective. He said the corporate guys up top don't care about the poor neighborhoods getting these supplies, and neither should she. He promised her a promotion by Friday if she just signed the manifest. Grace stared at the cash. $10,000 would save her mother's house instantly. It would wipe away months of suffocating anxiety. But then she looked through the office blinds. She saw Edward out on the dock, wiping grime off his daughter's face with a damp rag. She thought about the thousands of struggling parents who would buy this formula, trusting it to keep their babies alive. Her stomach twisted. She pushed the envelope back across the desk. She told Marcus she would rather starve than poison kids for a paycheck. Marcus's face turned purple with rage. Faced with dirty money and a severe threat, Grace chose the hardest path. Would you have the courage to do the same? Write it down right now. I choose to stand on the side of truth and justice. Let us know in the comments. And that brings us back to the freezing concrete floor. Marcus stormed out of the office, waving the termination papers. He screamed that she was finished in this industry. He threatened to blacklist her name across every logistics company in the state. Grace felt the tears stinging her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She packed her small bag, preparing to walk out into the cold night with nothing. Marcus wasn't done. He grabbed her shoulder and shoved her toward the exit door, calling her a worthless, idealistic fool. Suddenly, a hand clamped down on Marcus's wrist. The grip was like iron. Marcus gasped, turning around to see the ragged janitor standing between him and Grace. Edward's posture had completely changed. He was no longer slouching. His eyes were cold, calculating, and absolutely terrifying. Marcus tried to pull his arm away, shouting at the janitor to get his filthy hands off him. He told Edward he was fired too, calling him a pathetic rat. Edward didn't flinch. He let go of Marcus's wrist, reached into his torn flannel shirt, and pulled out his phone. He dialed a single number. The line connected immediately. Edward spoke quietly, but his voice echoed with a terrifying, absolute authority. He said, "Lock down Facility 7 immediately. Bring the federal authorities and the corporate audit team. Nobody leaves the loading dock." He hung up the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. Marcus stared at him for a second before bursting into hysterical laughter. He pointed a fat finger at Edward's chest. He mocked the janitor, asking if he was calling his imaginary friends from the homeless shelter. Marcus yelled at the warehouse security guards to grab them both. He wanted Grace and the rat thrown out into the freezing rain. But the guards hesitated. Something about the way Edward stood there made them freeze in their tracks. He was no longer slouching like a broken, desperate laborer. His shoulders were squared, and his eyes were sharp like a predator. Edward calmly unbuttoned the top of his torn flannel shirt. Underneath, he wasn't wearing a cheap, sweat-stained undershirt. He was wearing a custom-tailored, dark silk vest. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a solid black titanium card. It was heavy, sleek, and bore the platinum crest of the global logistics empire. Edward slapped the card onto the metal desk. Next, he reached into his worn duffel bag. He didn't pull out trash bags or cleaning supplies. He pulled out a massive stack of confidential corporate audit files. Every single page was stamped with the red seal of the Supreme Board of Directors. He dropped the files right on top of the counterfeit manifests. Marcus's laughter died instantly. The color completely drained from his face. His eyes widened in pure horror as he recognized the platinum crest on the black card. Only one man in the entire world carried that card. The billionaire founder and chairman of the company. Marcus's knees started to shake uncontrollably. He tried to speak, but only a pathetic squeak came out of his throat before he could even attempt to apologize. The massive warehouse doors blew open. The screeching sound of tires echoed through the facility. Blinding red and blue lights illuminated the dark loading docks. Dozens of armored corporate security officers and federal economic police swarmed the floor. They completely ignored Edward and surrounded Marcus. An officer grabbed Marcus by the collar, slamming him against his own glass office wall. Cold steel handcuffs snapped tightly around his wrist. Marcus fell to his knees, sobbing and begging for a second chance. He cried that he was just following orders to make extra cash. The police dragged him away, his pathetic wails fading into the night. The entire warehouse was dead silent. Hundreds of night shift workers stood frozen in absolute shock. Edward slowly turned to face Grace. The cold, terrifying look in his eyes vanished entirely. It was replaced by a look of profound warmth and genuine respect. He told Grace that his company had been bleeding millions of dollars to internal corruption. He knew regional directors were swapping life-saving goods for cheap, dangerous counterfeits, but he couldn't figure out who to trust anymore. So he took his daughter and went undercover. He spent months scrubbing toilets and hauling boxes in his own facilities. He was looking for just one honest person. He admitted he was ready to sell the entire empire yesterday. He truly believed that greed had corrupted every single soul in his company until he met her. He looked at Grace and said, her actions tonight restored his faith in humanity. She was willing to lose everything she had to protect people she didn't even know. Edward picked up the termination papers Marcus had just signed. He ripped them into shreds and tossed them into the air. He raised his voice so every worker in the facility could hear him. He announced that Grace was no longer a floor clerk, effective immediately. She was appointed as the Supreme Director of Quality Control for the entire global network. She would report directly to him, and her salary was being increased tenfold. Grace covered her mouth, her legs feeling weak. The suffocating weight of her mother's medical debt and her own anxiety vanished in a single second. Tears of pure relief streamed down her cheeks. Edward became the strongest shield protecting Grace's courage. If you believe in justice, let us know in the comments right now. Right, I choose to stand on the side of truth and justice. Suddenly, a tiny voice broke the silence. Edward's little girl ran across the concrete floor. She didn't look scared anymore. She threw her arms around Grace's legs, hugging her tightly. She looked up and thanked Grace for sharing her dinner. Grace knelt down on the cold floor and hugged the little girl back. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years, but the surprises weren't over. Edward stepped closer, looking down at Grace with an emotion that went far beyond professional respect. He had seen her true character when she thought he was nothing but a beggar. He slowly dropped to one knee, right there on the warehouse floor. The workers gasped in disbelief. Edward pulled a small, elegant velvet box from his pocket. He opened it, revealing a stunning diamond ring. He told Grace that an empire needs a strong leader, but his life needs a woman with a heart of gold. He asked her to marry him. He promised to spend the rest of his life standing by her side, fighting for what is right. Grace looked from the ring to the little girl and then into Edward's sincere eyes. She nodded, whispering a joyful yes through her tears. The entire warehouse erupted into deafening cheers and applause. When Edward proposed to Grace in front of thousands of workers, it proved that kindness is never wasted. If you believe in doing what is right, leave your declaration below. I choose to stand on the side of truth and justice. The courage to expose evil is the brightest diamond of human character. Resilient people who plant seeds of love will always harvest miracles. Subscribe to the channel today to warm your life with more inspiring stories. And never forget to stand on the side of truth and justice